You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, biohacking, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere and anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your host, Dr. Justin Marchegiani, as he answers your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome to Beyond Wellness Radio. Feel free and head over to beyondwellnessradio.com where you can access our full podcast transcriptions. While you're there, you can also sign up for our thyroid and female hormone video series. This series goes into the root cause of why your hormones are out of balance. While you're there, you can also schedule a functional medicine consult with Dr. Justin, myself, where we'll dig deeper into the root cause of your health challenges. Feel free and think of sharing this podcast with at least one person. This podcast grows by people sharing it. Sharing is caring. If you can think of one person that can benefit from this information, please feel free and share it. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also click below the video or podcast where you'll see the iTunes review button and leave us a review. You can also sign up for the newsletter at beyondwellnessradio.com where you'll get updates before anyone else. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. Monday down here in Austin, Texas. What's going on over in Louisville?
It's pretty. I had the window open, but I had to shut it because there's a bunch of big trucks that drive by, and I wanted a super clean audio today.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we got more pertinent clinical information coming out from our patients and from our practice, so more applicable information for everyone at home. And we talked in our pre-show that we wanted to talk about DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone. Do not confuse that with DHA, the 22-carbon fatty acid in fish oil, known as docosahexaenoic acid. We got all these multi-syllable words here that belong on Jeopardy. So we're going to be talking about the DHEA, the sex hormone precursor, not the fish oil DHA.
Yes, sir.
All
So
right.
when we're looking at adrenal cortisol or adrenal stress profile test, this is something that you and I run on every single patient. We're going to see that 24-hour rhythm where we want cortisol to be highest in the morning and we want it to gradually drop to the lowest point of the evening where melatonin can come up and the person can actually go to sleep and feel good. But something that we see every single day is people are going to have a few different things wrong with their adrenal rhythm. So one is going to be that they have high cortisol that's out of the charts, which means that their body's in a super catabolic state and they're in one of the earlier stages of adrenal fatigue where they're trying to start thriving and adapting to this stress. The body's producing excess hormones to deal with the bear that they're running away from, even if that bear is taxes that they haven't paid that they need to pay. And so secondly, what we'll see is that the cortisol is going to be depressed all day, and they're going to be in a later stage of adrenal fatigue where they've waited so long, they've burned the candle at both ends before they've come to work with one of us, that now they have a depressed cortisol all day, and that's a whole nother issue. And then the third piece of the puzzle, what we're going to discuss today, is the DHEA, which I kind of use the analogy of a bodyguard that's going to be anabolic in nature, that's going to protect you from the potentially catabolic effects of cortisol. And a lot of people will have either really high DHEA and their boat is still floating and they can cope with this cortisol, or the DHEA is super tanked out and the cortisol is tanked out as well. And those are some of the worst cases that we'll see.
Absolutely. Now, DHEA, if we kind of break hormones into a couple of different categories to keep it simple, hormones typically help your body grow and heal and recover, fight inflammation, and or improve energy. We kind of put all hormones in that category, right? If we look at like progesterone and estrogen, they're helping with growth, right? Cell growth, tissue growth, ideally pregnancy at some point for women. We have sex hormones like testosterone and DHEA, which can be very helpful for men in healing and recovery. And again, we have hormones that are more stress-based hormones, catecholamines, norepinephrine, epinephrine, adrenaline. Again, those are all the same hormones, 3 different names, right? Medicine likes to be confusing like that. And those are helping more with stress responses and to mobilize fuel during a stress response. So if we look at it in 3 categories, it's inflammation, it's cell growth and repair, and it is energy. So when we look at DHEA, that's helping more of the anabolic, the growth side. And as we become more and more stressed, our body prioritizes resources to deal with the stress of right now and hold off the healing of tomorrow. The problem is if you're constantly stressed, well, tomorrow always keeps on getting put off by one day, and we never quite reach that optimal repair window that we're looking to be in for optimal health. So when we're stressed, we're breaking down faster, right? That's catabolism, or being in a catabolic state, right? It's catastrophic to be in a catabolic state. That's how I remember that. It's not a good thing. So you're breaking down too much, and we want to shift it over. And DHEA is really an important anabolic hormone, and it's a precursor, right? Because it can turn into 7 or 8 different things. It can turn into all 3 estrogens: estrone, estradiol, estriol. It can turn into your progesterone, and it can even turn into andro or androstenedione, and it can even turn into potentially DHT and testosterone. So a lot of different hormones it can go into, and the goal is to help rebuild your body.
Yeah, and DHEA drops with age too. So
Big time.
you and I aren't too old yet. We're the point we're still probably making a lot of DHEA, but I've seen people with 22, 23 years old that have depressed DHEA levels worse than some of the 60-year-olds that we'll look at. So just because you are young doesn't mean that you are going to have that maximum output if your adrenal stress is going to overwhelm that level. Maybe we should talk about some of the symptoms that people may be feeling if they do have some type of adrenal imbalance, which would include low DHEA.
Great. So a lot of the adrenal symptoms are going to be connected in and around energy, in and around pain or inflammation, whether it's in the joints or it could be inflammation in the brain, like brain fog, mood, memory. Because DHEA is primarily going to be produced by the adrenal glands, a female is going to significantly notice it as they transition to menopause, because now they're not getting a lot of their anabolic hormones from their ovaries anymore because they're no longer cycling. So as soon as they start going into this perimenopausal range, where they start shifting or missing periods, or they go 3 years without a period, that's considered to be menopause. Once they start transitioning between 48 and age 51, they're going to be relying more on their adrenal glands for that sex hormone output. So my analogy is we get this backup generator, right? Let's say you live in the Northeast. I grew up in the Boston area, so this was common for me, but you'd purchase a generator, because if you ever had the power go out because of a big snowstorm for 2 or 3 days, you want to make sure you don't freeze. So you buy this big generator, and typically the generators would run off of either electricity or gasoline. Now, the gas has to be in the tank for that generator to work. So imagine you get this big snowstorm, it hits, and you don't fill that generator up fully with gasoline. Well, now when it comes time to need it and rely on that generator to power your house and to keep the heat going and electricity on, well, it's not going to be there for your needs. So you're going to start having symptoms like maybe lower heat in the house. You may have less electricity. Maybe the TV will flicker. Now, that's kind of akin to your adrenal glands, because that's the backup generator for women as they go into menopause for their sex hormones. So just like we had a generator that was not fully charged when the snowstorm hit, the snowstorm now is going to be menopause. So when menopause starts happening, that generator, your adrenal glands are more depleted with DHEA. So now when we start to rely more on those adrenals, they aren't going to be there to help us in this stressful transitionary period. And then the symptoms of menopause come on harder, which can be the mood, the hair loss, the skin issues, obviously the hot flashes, fatigue, depression, a whole milieu of symptoms. It could be 20 or 30 going down the line: vaginal dryness, low libido, all of the, the top 10 or 20 things that we see, weight gain, that all of our patients complain of.
Yeah, I would say the sex drive one's huge too.
Yes.
Every woman is, I've heard several women say they haven't had sex in 10 or 15 years with their spouse. That is a long time. And not to say that that's what the whole relationship's built around, but a lot of people prioritize that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then a lot of times that's a symptom of something deeper hormonally, right? Because fertility is a important sign of health. So if for some reason those fertility signals aren't there, i.e. libido being an important fertility signal, right? If you don't have the libido, then you don't have the strong motivation to have intercourse or to make love. So that's a really important sign that something is not there on the hormonal side. And again, when we have adrenal issues, we kind of have our 3 stages of adrenal fatigue, or better terminology is adrenal dysfunction, which just means as we go from stage normal to 1, that's a sign that cortisol is increasing. And as we have that hyper stress response, cortisol and DHEA will typically increase together. And as that response stays, right, if we have like someone sneak up behind us, boom, we go into that stage 1. It's a quick, we call it the alarm phase by Hans Selye. It's the alarm phase. So boom, cortisol goes up. Eventually we adapt and we go back into normal cortisol rhythm. But if we continue to stay stressed, our cortisol will start to drop, or the rhythm will start to become more aberrant, meaning instead of having that nice high to low to lower to lowest rhythm, it starts going off, maybe a little bit lower in the morning or higher in the afternoon or lower at night, right? And we start to feel that in our moods and our energy. And then we'll start to see DHEA drop into stage 2 as well. DHEA will drop. And then as we go into stage 3, we'll start seeing cortisol and DHEA drop as well. And that's like our ideal like scenario. We can go into some other scenarios that happen outside of our conventional 1, 2, and 3 for adrenal dysfunction. But as we go deeper from 2 into 3, what's happening is HPA axis dysfunction. That thermostat in our brain is not able to talk to the AC and the heater, i.e. our adrenals and maybe thyroid and other gonadal glands. So we start having this type of dysfunctional pattern.
So the way that I've understood this too, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's not that the adrenal glands run out. They're never going to run out of hormones because they're being told what to do by the brain and this whole HPA axis. So I've used this analogy for a while where the body's basically saying, hey, Justin, every time we give you stress hormones, you're taking it and you're running with it and burning the candle at both ends or whatever. And so now I'm going to downregulate and stop producing these hormones for you. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to turn on this process again and basically tell the nervous system and the brain, hey, everything's okay. Let's turn the system back on. Is that the best way to bring that across, or do you have any other ways you could explain or visualize that?
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that HPA axis rhythm back on track. We're trying to help support our body's ability to regulate inflammation, generate energy, but also repair, because that allocation is always hardwired to deal with the stress of now and the healing of tomorrow. And we want to make sure tomorrow actually happens so our body can do what it has to do to repair. So, Evan, we were just talking about strategies to help with stress hormones and to help push some of the anabolic hormones like DHEA back into balance. Did you want to go over a little more specifics on that?
Yeah, so the treatment is something that we'll get to, but the testing is the first step. So people listening, they may resonate with some of the symptoms, but you really have to get that. You need that 24-hour cortisol rhythm to be able to identify it. And that's something that you and I rely on very heavily, because without it, we're just guessing and checking. And that's where, this is nothing against naturopaths or anything other type of medicine practitioner, but if you go to someone and you complain of a symptom and you just get thrown a supplement, even if it is a natural herbal supplement or minerals, for example, if you don't have a lab that you're basing that protocol on, you're sort of shortchanging your potential results, because you might start spending money on various supplements and bottles. And I know everyone has a supplement graveyard where they've tried things and they don't work. You and I want to minimize how many supplements end up in that graveyard, or completely eliminate the graveyard, because we're going to be basing things on your results rather than, well, I think you might benefit from this.
Exactly. And again, a lot of people, as they get older, that DHEA drops like we talk about. And with some people, obviously, I should say with all people, the diet and lifestyle strategies are going to be really, really important, right? The blood sugar stability, obviously making sure our diet's like a paleo template to start, and then making sure we're getting sleep and doing some movement. That's kind of foundation. So everything we talk about after that is going to be that already assumed, just so we're clear on that. But supplementing using DHEA, we like to do it sublingually because we bypass the liver. And if we have patients, which we do quite frequently, that have digestive issues, we can bypass the gut. We can bypass the liver, which can deactivate about 4 times. You have to give 4 times more orally via a pill than you do with the sublingual drops. So we can bypass that. We can get the same effect of an injection without the needle by absorbing it through our sublingual and buccal tissue in the mouth.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So again, dosage wise, we like to use smaller doses or lower doses. Typically 5 to 10 milligrams is a pretty good starting dose. And it's kind of a little bit contradictory in thinking, but we would actually use the more adrenally fatigued or the more adrenal dysfunction there is, we typically want to use less DHEA because of the fact that DHEA can also have an effect of lowering cortisol. So you can think of DHEA and cortisol as like a seesaw. And the more DHEA we put in the system, the more it can decrease our cortisol level. So if we're already having issues with energy and adrenal insufficiency and low cortisol and inability to regulate inflammation, going too high on the DHEA can definitely cause some problems.
Yes, sir.
So regarding that, typically we do DHEA between 5 and 10 milligrams sublingually, and then that's a couple. So that's spread out over 2 or 3 times over the course of the day because we're trying to mimic normal physiology and not just give one whack at once, right? Your adrenals aren't going to just spit out a whole bunch of DHEA all at once. It's going to do it naturally. So mimicking natural rhythms is going to be the best possible way to handle it.
Yeah, so if you're at the health food store and you see 50 milligrams of DHEA, don't buy and start taking that supplement just because you think you have low DHEA.
Definitely not worth it. And then also with DHEA, you alluded to like the DHEA cortisol ratio. Typically, we're at this 6-to-1 type of ratio. We should be able to make at least 6 times the amount of cortisol in relation to 1 unit of DHEA. And as we start going above that, like you had a patient, I think this morning, Evan, that was at 30, you said. So if we do the math, they're 5 times more catabolic than anabolic. In other words, in layman terms, that means they're breaking down 5 times faster than their body should be rebuilding and healing.
Yeah, and this is actually a guy who's doing CrossFit 3 to 4 times a week, and he's wondering why he can't build muscle.
Right. Exactly. And again, there's a lot of stuff out there on DHEA, like not working, like not being good or not being the best thing. There's a lot of factors that go into it, right? Are we using DHEA in conjunction with the right amount of pregnenolone? Are we fixing underlying issues, right? If we just use DHEA like someone uses ibuprofen for a headache, right? Well, that may not be the underlying issue. If you're banging your head every day and you're taking ibuprofen for a headache, well, the underlying cause is banging your head. Now, that's kind of a drastic analogy, but people have underlying analogies like infections or low stomach acid or dysbiosis or SIBO or toxicity issues or food allergens. And that, even though the bang in the head's pretty obvious, it's more subtle with the underneath things, but that may still be in motion and happening every day. So we got to make sure if we're using DHEA and potentially pregnenolone with it, we got to make sure it's being used in conjunction with a comprehensive functional medicine program.
Yeah, exactly. And based on labs.
Based on labs, yeah. And then typically for labs, we're using that 2 to 10. I think it's the PG per ml ratio. It's the typical salivary ratio that most labs use, like BioHealth uses it, Diagnostics uses it, ZRT uses it. That's your broad spectrum lab ratio, and we like it. I'd say 6 to 10 is a pretty good place for me. What do you like?
What are you saying?
For the lab rate, so like for the lab levels on the salivary lab at DHEA-sulfate, what level do you like patients to be at regarding their DHEA?
Most people, they feel the best somewhere on the mid to upper end there, closer towards 6, 7, sometimes 8. Definitely not what I saw this morning, which was, I think, a 0.8 DHEA. That was just awfully low, and he can feel it.
Wow, you saw someone at a 0.8. Yeah, that's really low.
Yeah, and this is the same guy. This is the guy whose cortisol sum was decent. He was like a 28 when we would consider something like 30 or more decent. So he was decent on cortisol, but the DHEA was less than 1 unit. So that's the lowest I've seen. And most people say they feel best. It seems like 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. And then I've seen some other crazy ones. I'm sure you have too, where DHEA was 20 or 30, just out of the roof. And sometimes I found that these people were just popping DHEA supplements like Skittles.
Exactly. And the range that I like for the lab of the DHEA-sulfate, that's the salivary DHEA sulfate. That's looking more at the storage form of DHEA. I like 6 to 10, and that's a NG per ml, nanograms per milliliter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then in the lab range, like some of the blood labs, they're a little bit different for the blood labs. We typically like in the 200s for the blood lab. I'll pull up my template that I typically use with most patients here in a sec. Any other comments on the salivary labs, the salivary lab ranges?
No.
Got it. Yeah, so looking at the blood labs are a little bit different when we look at the blood, so the reference range may be a tiny bit different here. Our blood labs, we're typically going to be looking at DHEA-sulfate. I like upwards of 250 to 300, and that's micrograms per deciliter. So different reference range, different standard deviation. So upwards of 250 or so is a pretty good place to be. And if you're on DHEA drops, you got to be mindful that you come off them for a day or at least 36 hours to 48 hours, at least 2 days to get an accurate reading of what your DHEA levels are actually pumping out from the adrenals. Anything else you want to add, Evan?
No, that's it.
All right, great. Well, I know you got a patient here. I do as well. So wrapping it up, get your blood lab, a DHEA-sulfate done, and or get a comprehensive cortisol rhythm like Evan mentioned using the salivary DHEA. Well, great talk today, Evan. We will be in touch very soon.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com and click the questions button. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, click below to review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.